So I was triggered a little bit by a video that YouTube decided to try to show me because it thought I might be interested in it. Possibly because I've been looking at system design videos to try to figure out what the current state of YouTube is. And I've noticed that a lot of anti patterns are being perpetuated on YouTube because it often kind of feels like a lot of the system design videos that I've seen, whether it's simple services like a URL minimizer or a larger one like an Uber clone, they often include in what seem to be intentional errors to make the people learn the wrong thing. And I've come to the conclusion that misinformation on YouTube videos is a troubling concern, not just for political content or news, but for engineering content as well. Because what's really happening here is the people who know are intentionally creating bad information and putting it online as the truth and kind of weaving it into what is, shown as a solution when it's really not, or maybe it's a suboptimal solution. For example, there was a video that I was initially kind of triggered by that showed the design for a simple URL shortening service, but it included a copy of Zookeeper, which didn't make any sense at all. Because when you ultimately get down to the problem, they added Zookeeper to deal with a multiple server issue where if you have two different people hitting two different servers at the same time and trying to get back some sort of primary key, which would be the same because of a counting index or something. And so the issue there is that not only were they not using the correct backend, but they weren't actually thinking about parallelism correctly. So they tried to just solve the problem by adding more complexity instead of solving the initial problem and making things simpler so you didn't have that complexity and therefore didn't need to try to mitigate the problem with the solution of adding Zookeeper. And what I realize is that there are so many channels out there that are so much more popular than mine that are only that popular because people want to know this stuff. And so they go to these channels thinking they're going to learn. And then those channels take advantage of that by doing sponsorships for technologies or actively misrepresenting the technology in order to intentionally make you dumber or make it so that you actively learn the wrong way because they don't want to have to compete with you. And I hate that. I think as an engineer, you should be allowed to learn. You should be allowed to read a book. You should be allowed to watch a video. You should be allowed to learn and grow as an engineer to build bigger and better things. The problem I'm finding is that when I go online and I go to YouTube or whatever, I see an interest in system design, but I don't see it done well. And I've done a couple system design videos as kind of a troll content slash realist content because I wanted to see what people would do. And what I found interesting was that my UUID video got so many downvotes because people didn't understand what I was saying. What I was trying to espouse was too complicated for them. And so they actively tried to point out things like, oh, well, if you use a UUID, then your database is going to churn because you've got too many things and it's randomized. Well, duh, you're using the wrong backend in that case. There's a separation of concerns here that people aren't learning as part of their system design theory. And I find that very interesting because what's really happening is you're building out one part of the system to depend on how another part of the system works. And that's how you create technical debt. This particular image, I've seen it many times over the years, and I think this is just one of the many copies that is online. You can find it all over the place. This Hacker Noon is not the only place I've seen it, and the article that I actually got this from is newer, which means they stole it from somebody else and added it to their own content. When in reality, I've seen this meme so many times over the years, it's ridiculous. But one of the things that you need to understand as an engineer is that you should get to the simplest solution possible. As engineers, we actively want to play with shiny technology like zookeeper or whatever, because it's fun for us as engineers to add that complexity. We revel in the complexity and we enjoy it because as engineers, we enjoy figuring out the complexity and conquering it. And unfortunately, as part of that, sometimes engineers build systems that are more complicated than they need to be just because they want the enjoyment of conquering that complexity, not because it adds any kind of business value or makes the situation or solution easier to maintain. In this case, deploying a zookeeper instance is a pain in the butt, and I would never add that for a simple URL shortening service. I would actually design the primary key of the index to be a simple table, and I would take into account, well, is it multi-user or not, and things like that. And I would simply use a UUID. I would have a giant cache. I would have things working, and if I got data and metrics and everything else back from the system that said that was a flawed design, that's great because I would have allowed myself to use the repository pattern, and I would have actually used the command pattern and maybe CQRS or something, very, very light version of it, nothing too in depth, just to make sure that when the time came, I could swap out the entire backend with something else because I felt like it or because it was legitimately needed. The fact is, in the end, you should design the system to be as simple and minimal as possible. Minimalism in engineering will get you a lot farther than trying to build out big, shiny systems with big, tiny technology. And it's going to allow you to get more work done in the end. Because when something goes wrong, you're going to have less data to fit inside your head, and you're going to have the ability to get through it quicker because of that. Okay. This meme is good though, because what it shows is that we add arbitrary complexity. We make bad assumptions about what the customer wants and trying to solve the problem. The core issue here is we should be trying to solve the problem, and that's it. Okay. The customer didn't explain it well. Okay. That's our first goal. The project leader, didn't do his work. The engineer designed it badly because obviously these do not conflict. The programmer in here failed and they did not do a good job. The sales executive described a better solution. This is why as an engineer I often like to talk to sales, because I could have taken what they described there and everything else, and I would have had a much better idea of what to build. A lot of this stuff never would have happened. The project's not going to get documented. That's the code, okay? And that's how it works. Unfortunately, sometimes I love putting documentation out there, but if I'm not getting paid to do that, then I'm not going to, because guess what? If I try anyway, I'm going to get yelled at. My boss is going to fire me for wasting time, and at that point, I'm not going to have a job. So it's better for me to make the right thing, write clean code, and let the code document the process. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not going to write a README, and that doesn't mean I'm going to have dev documentation, but I may not have customer-facing documentation, and that's fine. What operations installed? Well, guess what? Operations is going to install whatever you hand them. They don't care. Okay, they're not going to build an entirely new solution. So this is kind of dumb. This pain. Uh, Customers going to get billed this way no matter what, because marketing is going to be a part of that. I hate that. As an engineer, I wouldn't do that, but that's not up to me. Help desk won't support it if they can, which is why you should build out the system as minimally as possible. The smaller the system is, the more minimum the system is, the less bugs and defects there will be. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the less problems they'll have with it. Okay. Customer really needed was a tire swing, but guess what? They were sold a, a, an easy chair and a swing, and the engineer is probably giving them this monstrosity that would not even let them use it. And so that's the issue is QA. The engineer designs it like this. That means they failed. That also means that the QA failed. It generally means that the engineer didn't do any QA. This meme basically shows the wrong process. And I think it's the perfect example of what I'm trying to explain with the YouTube video that I found that was describing the wrong design scenario for the wrong solution for a popular link minimization app design. Because at the end of the day, you should be focused on what the actual problem is. And if I go to that, let's see. If I go to the actual thing on my other screen here, It's such a small thing. Load balancer, however many web servers are needed to handle the traffic, a database for data persistence, and a cache. That's it. That's it. If you're trying to figure out your views and everything, you can do that asynchronously using the logs for the system. You don't even need a cache for that. You don't need to count them in real time. You can literally in Amazon just look at your freaking logs in CloudFront and have something roll them up using a Lambda or something, and at that point you're done. You really don't need to add complexity. You really don't need to add extra systems. You're not going to need it. Okay, this is a common design adage. This is a common thing that engineers tell each other because we're familiar with the idea that we can be scared and anxious and worried that something will happen, and then we'll put all this time and effort and code into it, and then at the end of the day it's just dead code, and it makes the system more complicated. You should be striving for minimization in your designs. That is the best way of looking at it. Don't allow complexity to take a hold of you, either because it's fun or because you get lost and you don't understand the problem. Look at the problem, define the problem first, and then just simply minimize the solution to solve it, because you can always iterate, and you should be. You should be iterating. That's what different sprints are for. That's what agile is for. You shouldn't go out of your mind trying to optimize a system for scenarios that don't exist. And if you're out there looking at the thing that I commented on it and that I'm talking about, you should understand that at the end of the day, the problem domain for a tiny URL service is input URL, get a link that will redirect people to that URL, and have the link that you get back be much shorter than that URL statistically. Now, that doesn't mean that the URL that you get back will always be shorter. And that's one of the big problems with these services, is that they're often only used to hide the URL you're going to be redirected to maliciously. And so when we talk about the problem domain, what is the real problem domain? Because it's not that people don't want to know the link they're clicking on. The problem domain in this case is tiny URL services are used for marketing and sales. They're used to trick people into going to links that they otherwise wouldn't do. And so you're putting all this thought and effort into the wrong thing instead of building a product that people actually want to click on.